What's up, guys? I want to make a really quick video correcting a historical inaccuracy from Bromley's latest video. It's a very good video overall. I recommend you watch it. I agree with most of it, but there's one inaccuracy that's glaring enough that I think it needs to be addressed. Before I get into that, sorry to you guys who were watching my 5-day fast documentation. I just got swamped with work. I had a ton of client requests that I needed to get to, which is a good problem to have, but I just couldn't keep up with the upload schedule. And then that rolled into my mom coming to visit to see the grandkids. So I've been kind of in family mode this week and not posting a lot. I will do a recap of the last 3 days of the fast. It actually went very well. Some very cool stuff came out of it, but I just haven't had the time yet. Anyway, let me get into it. I'll show you the clip from Bromley's video that I'm referencing, and then I'll respond to it.
Now let's get on to some concrete numbers, is what you're really here for. How strong could they be really? Now the problem is, just like after the creation of steroids, it put a big fuzzy question mark as to whether any feat we look at is actually natty. We can never really know. The same thing before the steroid era is when lifting was kind of in its infancy. We can't really know for sure if the numbers cited were actually legit because so many of them were gym lifts, things people saw, exhibitions, circus sideshows. The thing is, people lie about weights today. They do it all the time. There's fake plates. Even when we have digital scales, cameras, and Wi-Fi on every fucking continent, it still exists in lifting culture. So when you go back in time before things like federations existed, like literally you're making money by demonstrating feats in front of a crowd, what exactly is your incentive to have the weights be exactly what you say they are? And who the fuck is gonna test your work? I mean, today we had Athlete X, Brad Castleberry. We had this guy, Valentin Ducoul, like a decade ago that was making up bullshit lifts. There's a lot of money in being a fucking charlatan, guys. So for that reason, I look at everybody throughout the 1800s with a raised eyebrow. Do not get me started on Saxon's bullshit bent press numbers.
So, like I said, the rest of the video was good, but that one part is just a giant inaccuracy. And it pretty much starts with the idea that there were no federations for lifting in the Bronze Era. So, I guess Bromley has this idea that like the only people lifting in the Bronze Era were performing strongmen who were entertaining audiences for money, but that could not be further from the truth. Amateur athletics was actually a big deal in the Bronze Era, and bigger than it is now. It was kind of a whole ethic. I think the idea was that you wanted to preserve purity of sport by having people purely competing in sport because they enjoyed it and not letting money be a factor. I'm not going to, this isn't going to be a historical essay on the history of amateur athletics, but it was a big enough deal that at multiple times there were controversies over people not being allowed in the Olympics because they had participated in some sort of competition for money, thereby losing their amateur status, which was that at that time coveted. Now we want to be pro athletes, but back in the day, you actually wanted to be an amateur athlete, and that was because of, I think, conceptions about the purity of sport and how this is not something we should be doing for money. We should just be doing it for love of the game. Plus, kind of the idea of a balanced life. You should have your professional life, some sort of athletic outlet, some sort of artistic outlet, all that. Honestly, not bad ideas. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Bottom line, the vast majority of lifters in the Bronze Era were, in fact, amateurs. They were amateur enthusiasts, just as they are now, hobbyists, and yes, they did compete, and yes, there were federations. I know there were federations in America, in Great Britain, in France, in Germany, just to name a few. I'm sure there were others, but most of the major European countries, or Western countries, shall we say, did in fact have lifting federations, and of course they had rules for their competitive lifts. And it wasn't just the Olympic lifts, it wasn't just the snatch, clean and jerk, or even just the clean and press because that used to be an Olympic lift. And it wasn't even just the one hand versions of the snatch and clean and jerk because those were also Olympic lifts at that time. No, they had, I mean, they had rule sets for tons of different lifts because you have to remember this was kind of the infancy of lifting as we know it. So people were trying everything, and whatever people were lifting, however they were doing it, they were setting out rules for it and competing in it, right? And it got, got very technical. I think on this page that I have bookmarked, this is, by the way, Super Strength by Alan Calvert. If you're only going to read one primary source from the Bronze Era, make sure this is it. Here we have a discussion by Calvert. You may be able to freeze frame this if my camera is good enough. Hopefully, trying to hold it up so that you can. Okay, yeah. So here we have a discussion. Sorry, this is trying to hold it up so you can read it. Of the here, this page. Yeah, I'm doing this backwards. Anyway, it's a discussion of the rule set for deadlifts in various countries. I believe what he's saying here is something about the British rule that the heels have to be together in the deadlift. They did not allow sumo at that time in England, and they didn't want you to be anywhere near sumo. So anyway, but I believe it differed on other countries. I know I've seen elsewhere a specified number of inches that your heels can't be further than apart. So they were definitely making sure you didn't do sumo. One hand deadlift, I know for a fact. There's a specified number of inches you can't do sumo. So they had rule sets for all this stuff. They had competitors, they had judges, and obviously, just as now, you're using standardized equipment, and your competitors are not going to be real happy if you bring in some fake weights. So the idea that everybody was just using fake weights at that time is absolute nonsense. Now, fake weights were used, but that would be maybe in a strongman exhibition, and depending on the guy. Some strongmen were known to have used fake weights. Others had fairly good reputations and were believed by even their rivals not to use fake weights. So you just kind of have to reach primary sources to figure out whose reputation is what. But that's neither here nor there. Bottom line, they were not using fake weights, you know, in official attempts, through federations with judges and whatnot. Now, the only thing you can really say is, okay, they didn't have electronic scales, so maybe they weren't measuring as accurately as we are now. And I'm sure to a certain extent that's true. But keep in mind, at least by the time this book was written, we'd already managed to have one world war. So I feel like if we can create, combat aircraft, bombs, guns, create an industrialized warfare, I feel like we can probably weigh a barbell to a decent degree of accuracy. You know what I mean? And Calvert, by the way, was a barbell manufacturer, so I'm sure he would have been up to date on the latest barbell weighing techniques. But anyway, um, point being, they absolutely had competitions, they had referees, they had rules, and they understood what official lifts were versus gym lifts. I mean, you look at this book. Uh, I mean, he's guys listing tons of feats from tons of different athletes, and he's very careful to include whether it was an official attempt. And this book, by the way, he's a little bit more biased, I think, towards amateur competitors as opposed to professional exhibition lifters, right? But he's very careful to include whether this is a gym lift or a competition lift or an official lift, an official accredited lift, right? That distinction was absolutely present in the Bronze Era. To give another example, this wonderful book, The Super Athletes by David Willoughby, a huge compilation of not only like more lifting feats than you could possibly think of, but plenty of other athletics as well. Um, he goes into great detail about kind of the reliability of our source on various feats. So it's not just a matter of all lifts in the Bronze Era were legit, all lifts in the Bronze Era are untrustworthy. No, we have varying degrees of evidence, so let's look into it. Right, this whole page that I have bookmarked, Arthur Saxon, who by the way has one of the best reputations among all his peers at the time. Some folks didn't have the best reputation. He definitely was not one of those. He had a great reputation. Anyway, I'm trying to get this where it's not blurry. Sorry, guys. In case you guys do want to freeze frame and just read it. Okay, there we go. So this both of these pages are a discussion of his various recorded bent press feats because that came into question in Bromley's video. Okay, and yeah, Willoughby's careful to look at the varying degrees of evidence. Like this one here, where are we? Here we're discussing one of the highest bent presses um, that Saxon's ever been credited with, 386 pounds. But Willoughby's careful to note that that is not considered to be a legitimate record attempt. Um, he specifically lists it as unofficial, right? Where you see unofficial, yeah, unofficial bench press. So that idea was already, you know, well known, well understood that you can't just, do a gym lift in front of your buddies and count it as an official record, right? Um, Contrast that with this earlier lift here. If I can show you, yeah, here we go. Sorry, try to figure out. There we go. Now this one is 335 and three quarters pounds, so they were weighing to fair degree of accuracy. That was an official record. Apparently, W.A. Pullum was the judge that witnessed this, and it even gives a fairly good description of the barbell, a steel 6 foot bar of 1 inch diameter, loaded with mainly 15-pound plates. And again, you might say, oh well, maybe what if some of them were 13 or 16? Okay, perhaps you could make maybe he lifted 330 pounds or 325 pounds, 340 pounds, who knows? So if you want to throw in a degree of inaccuracy just because they aren't measuring it all on like a electronic scale or whatever, sure. But that sounds pretty legitimate. I think the highest one that he's usually credited with as his official number is 371 pounds. But even if you don't give credence to that particular lift, he has, I mean, numerous. This whole page is covered with 340, 335, 356 or 7, 350. Yeah, but bottom line, um, there are tons of lifts recorded that he did with well over 300 pounds. So even if you don't take any particular one as credible, like he most definitely lifted well over 300 pounds to arm's length overhead in front of judges on, legit non-fake plates, whether you want to quibble over the electronic measurement of them or whatnot. Um, it's a very similar situation with Herman Gorner's one hand deadlift. He's often credited with a 727-pound one hand deadlift, but that was not an official lift, so hard to really credit that with him. Some people even say that's a confusion with a different implement, like a sandstone block, which wouldn't have had the revolving barbell component anyway. But everyone credits him with his 664-pound one hand deadlift, which was performed in an official capacity in front of an accredited judge and whatnot. So that one's counted as legit. And I mean, hey, we've had guys hit 600, 585 in recent years. One hand deadlift, hook grip on a barbell, right? So that's not that far out of the realm of possibility. Anyway, the point of all this is, um, you certainly shouldn't believe everything you hear from the Bronze Era. And I'll tell you one thing I don't believe about Saxon. I don't believe his beer drinking. I mean, I think anyone would die of alcohol poisoning with some of the exaggerated feats of beer drinking he's credited with. But I think that was just his publicist. I don't know that he necessarily ever. I've never heard of him personally boasting about drinking 100 beers. That's something that other people have said about him. Okay, so I don't think that was him trying to be like, yeah, I have the world record in beer drinking. I would definitely need to see an official judge to believe he downed 100 beers in one night. That's insane, right? But his lifts, I think, are all legitimate, or you know, and no one at the time, even his rivals, was claiming that he was faking his lifts or that any of the weights were fake. The most they'd say is that bent press itself is just not a legitimate technique because you're not really pressing with upper body strength, but you're still lifting 300 pounds overhead with one hand. And by the way, for the doubters on that, I have here bookmarked. Okay, so these are guys you've never heard of here on this page. These two guys you've never heard of them. They're well under 200 pounds each. These guys are bent pressing 230 and 245 pounds, respectively. Not large men. This was considered obviously good, but like not exceptional for a man to be bent pressing 225 pounds in that era. So, I mean, I think if just no names are bent pressing something we consider insane today, I think it's possible that the best of all time. And by the way, this guy's wrist was measured at like about 9 inches on a 210-pound guy with 9 inch wrist. That's insane. So that stands to reason he might be able to do something a little bit strange. But anyway, all right, we're getting into the weeds. Point of all this being, yes, many Bronze Era feats of strength are absolutely legit, or we have every bit as much reason to believe that they're legit as any of the other records from that day. Like if you believe, for example, shot put distances from that era. If you believe, track numbers of, how fast someone ran a certain distance. I mean, obviously they didn't have as accurate modern stopwatches, but if you believe, the basic track numbers, shot put, javelin, and any other amateur athletic numbers from that era, I see no reason why we would also not believe weightlifting feats that were performed officially. And a good number of the most impressive feats by the most impressive strongmen were actually performed officially, right? And the way to determine which is which is just to get into the primary sources, not necessarily don't read the guy himself and take his word for it, but read what other people have to say about him, more objective people from that era who were, you know, compiling compiling the data, looking at how legit everything was. They'll let you know whether it was an official, if it was an official record or a, just some guy and his buddies, you know, lifting in the gym, right? Anyway, um, just one thing that I felt needed to be corrected because I do think a lot of people like to dismiss some of this stuff and other people take it all as gospel, right? And I mean, the reality is you just need to crack some primary sources and see because it's on a sliding scale. Some of these lifts are, I think, beyond reasonable doubt. I mean, you have to be really nitpicky to find a reason not to believe them. Others, not so much, right? So it's a case by case basis, but just read some books, especially this one, and you'll figure out which ones are more or less legit. Anyway, by and large, the video that I'm critiquing was actually quite good. I agree with Bromley about I like Bromley's method of going back into the previous eras to get some idea of what natural potential is. It's very similar to my own ideas on the topic, and he's right about just about everything in that video. But that's one thing that's just a glaring inaccuracy. So whichever side you end up on from this video, you should still go shop at Barbell Apparel, buy a shirt like this. I think it looks very cool. Or better yet, their jeans, which you guys know I've been wearing forever, and I think they're awesome. Because he's sponsored by Barbell Apparel too. So whoever side you take, yeah, the buy from the guys who are supplying both sides in this conflict. Okay, wait, no, I'm not. Sorry, I feel like I'm shooting a Toyota ad now. No, anyway, there's no conflict. I like Bromley. Uh, I'm responding to his video because I watch all his videos because like they pop up in my feed because I think he puts out good videos. It's just one thing I needed to correct. So there's no conflict. We're not going to be putting anti-aircraft guns in Toyota trucks that are not for sale in the United States because somehow the Taliban gets stuff we don't. Am I allowed to say that on here? Shit. All right. Okay. So first Barbell Apparel ad. I'm mentioning the Taliban. Okay. I'm gonna get fired. Okay. Whatever. We can cut that later, right? Anyway, I'm gonna sign off now while I'm ahead. But you guys get the point. Like, just Barbell Apparel makes good clothes, and I like Probably. That's where I was going with all that. All right, guys, and I will get the video on fasting and like all the other cool stuff that came out of it because some really cool stuff that happened at the same time that I want to make videos on, but I've just been swamped with content recently. So yeah, I'm gonna sign off before I get myself in trouble anymore.